This is TJ with the Adapco Service Department. We're going to do a quick video here on checking the carburetor on a Kohler Command Pro 9.5 that you would find on our 95 G4 sprayers. Our first step is going to be removing the air filter cover and the air filter. These two clips on the side, pop them down, set it to the side, filter comes straight off, set that to the side as well. Next, we want to remove this cover. We want to make sure both of these levers are pushed all the way forward. We have two screws down here that are either Torx 20, T20, or Phillips head. Usually you're going to find them to be the T20 Torx. You've got your two 10mm bolts up here, so have your 10mm socket ready. Pop these off. Pull straight out. Set that to the side. Next, we're going to remove this intake. To do that, we need to remove both of the 13mm nuts and the one 8mm screw in the back here. After you've removed the 13mm nuts and the 8mm screw, this intake should slide forward. Now there's a breather tube behind it that will be left behind, and it connects here on this tube when we go to put it back together. Set that to the side. Also, the gasket for this, take it off and set it to the side. Next up, we're going to remove the fuel line. Remember, if you have fuel in your fuel tank, it will come out at this time. Best to do this with the tank drained or clamp the line before you remove it. Remove the clamp with a pair of needle nose pliers. Pull the tube up while pushing on it just a little bit. Next, we want to remove the return spring for the throttle. It's nice to use a pair of needle nose pliers for this. Grab it, turn it up, and it pops right out. Move this arm all the way over, and this rod will come right out as you pull out a little bit. From that point, your carburetor is now off. Now that our carburetor is off, we can start our disassembly. One thing to remember is there will be fuel in your main bowl as well as your filter bowl. You can drain that out into a proper container before you get started, and it'll help control the mess some. To drain the filter bowl, there's a 10mm hex head nut molded onto the bowl itself. That will be on there fairly tight, so use your socket and your ratchet to loosen that. Now there will be fuel in there most likely, but to drain the main bowl in the carburetor, there's an 8mm bolt on the side of the bowl. Use your 8mm socket and pull that out. After removing the screw from the side of the bowl, you want to make sure that the seal is on it. You see there's a black rubber seal on there. You want to make sure that it's definitely on there when you put it back on, or it will leak fuel. Next, we'll remove the bowl. To do that, remove the 10mm bolt on the bottom of it. Your next step, there's a pin that holds the float in. It fits loosely. Go ahead and pull that out, set it down. Then you can also remove the float itself. Note that it does have the needle built into it, so make sure that the needle valve is present and looks good. Set that to the side. To inspect your main jet, you'll want a flathead screwdriver that's fairly skinny on the sides because it needs to fit down in this port to remove the main jet. I'm just going to unscrew it. And it should fall out. Now what came out is the emulsion tube, which this end of it is the part that actually sticks up inside the carburetor, and this is what holds it in place. This little piece of brass, this is the jet. You might be able to see there's a very small hole right in the middle of it, and that actually controls the amount of flow that is sent to the carburetor for higher speed, higher than idle speed. After you've removed the main jet, you'll also have the emulsion tube inside the carburetor. If I tilt it down, it falls right out because this one is nice, new, and clean. You will want to make sure this is clean as well. Be gentle with it, but you want to make sure this has all its holes opened up and all its ports open as well. You should be able to see down through it. Next, we want to inspect the idle jet, which is located under here. To do that, we need to remove this screw, which sets your idle. We want to make sure we get that back in the same spot. So what I like to do in this situation is turn it in all the way, but watch your turns. See on my screwdriver here, I put a black line down it. I'm going to start there. So I've got my black line at the top, but I turned it in. 1, 2, 3, 4, and that stopped. I'd call it about 4 1/4 turns in. So now when I'm done with it, I know I can put it back to that spot, and my idle should be right where I left it. Now that we've checked our turns and we know how to get that screw right back where it was, we'll remove it completely. With your screw removed, you can remove the plastic piece beneath it, as well as the jet itself. You can use a flathead screwdriver, push up on it a little bit, and it comes out. Now that the carburetor is partially disassembled and we have our jets out, let's check them. We have our idle jet, our emulsion tube, and our main jet. All three of these jets have ports in them that need to be wide open. If they have a little bit of buildup in them, your motor's not going to run very good. Typically, to clean them out, they make specific tools to get to them, but typically to clean the jets, I'd use what I have around, which is there's a piece of 16 gauge wire, and I've had one strand off to the side, a thicker piece of wire with a slightly thicker strand, one strand pull off to the side, and if you have one around, you can use welding wire. It's pretty handy as well. May be difficult to see, but there's a little brass piece in the bottom of this plug. There's a tiny hole in it. When I poke through the hole in the jet, you're going to see the wire come through on this hole right behind it. Don't know if you can see, but see the wire is poked through and going into the middle section, so we know there's no obstruction. That's good and clean. Wouldn't hurt to still blow it out with some carburetor cleaner. Next, we'll check out our emulsion tube. See, it has a large hole through the middle of it, and it has some small holes at the base. So what I'll do, can use this wire I had out, poke through the little holes, make sure that they're opened. You can use your welding wire or something thicker to poke through and make sure that everything is nice and wide open inside that. You would also want to hit that with some carburetor cleaner just to be safe. Next up, we'll clean our main jet. You can see it's got the small hole inside of it. So we want to use our wire, poke through it completely. So we know it's good. Good and clean. Clean that up with your carburetor cleaner as well, just to make sure you got everything off of it. With your carburetor disassembled, it's a good time to clean it up a little bit better. You want to use your carburetor cleaner with the little tube that comes with it. You want to have the entire carburetor sprayed down to clean all the dirt off the outside of it so it doesn't fall in during reassembly. And once it's disassembled, you want to make sure everything's nice and clean. One of the things you're going to want to do, use the tube that came with your carburetor cleaner, go to every port, everywhere that looks like a hole, everywhere that looks like fuel would flow, put the hose in it, hit it with the carburetor cleaner. It may splash out, it may shoot back at you, so make sure you have your PPE, gloves, face mask, anything you feel necessary. It's also a good idea to control where the waste fluid goes. Now that everything's clean, we're ready for reassembly. Let's get our emulsion tube in. Skinny side goes in first. If you shake it in a little bit, you'll see it sticks out actually down in the carburetor. So we see here, see, popped up right in the middle there. Next, we're ready to put the main jet back in. If you look down in there, you can see the bottom of the emulsion tube. Take our main jet, smooth side goes in first. The slide with the slots on it for the flat head goes in on the back. Drop that in place. Use our narrow flathead and screw it in until it's snug. Next, we're going to reassemble the float assembly. You can see it has a needle on it. This brass here is the seat for that. So we want to make sure the needle goes in nicely. Let's see here. Goes in all the way, and the holes line up for our small pen, which we'll put on here. And that does fit loosely, don't worry about it. Once the bowl goes on, it holds it in place. Next, we'll put the bowl back on. This is the front side of the carburetor that's facing away from the engine. When we put the bowl back on, we want to have the drain facing out. In case we ever need to use it, we'll be able to open it up without having to remove the carburetor. We'll use our 10mm bolt that has the green seal on it. Put that right in the bottom. Put our drain back in. Remember, it has the rubber seal on it. Tighten this up with a 10mm. Tighten this up with an 8mm. Doesn't have to be extremely tight, just make sure it doesn't leak. Now we've got our main bowl put back on, we can add our fuel shutoff bowl. This is the one that has the 10mm hex molded into the bottom of it. You want to make sure you get this in nice and smooth. Don't cross thread it. Let it catch easy. There we go. Then tighten it up with your 10mm on the bottom. Next, we're going to get our idle jet back in. See, the jet has these two flat spots on the sides. That will have it going against this flat wall right here at the end of my pliers. We want to make sure we get this in smoothly. Turn the flathead so it matches the wall. Push it down. Make sure it's snug. Heard a nice little click. Next, put this piece back on. That holds the jet in place. And next, after that, we're going to actually put the set screw back in. This is a plastic screw, so make sure it's threaded correctly. This is the one that we removed on mine, and it was 4 1/4 turns out. So to get it back where it started from, I'm going to put it in all the way until it's flush. Okay. I've got my mark on my screwdriver. I'll go over a quarter, come back, I had a quarter turn and then 4 regular turns. So I did my quarter, 1, 2, 3, 4. That should have my idle set to where it was when I started. Somewhere through this process, you've probably had the choke arm fall off. All this does, the hole that's in the middle goes on this post, and this little roll pin goes right here and the choke lever. So when you move it, it closes the choke. It's held in place with the intake when we put everything back on, but it fits loose for now. Now that our carburetor is cleaned and reassembled, we're going to reinstall it on the motor. The front side of the carburetor has the extra filter bowl on it. So the 2 holes back here, the 2 holes here, will go on studs. I have to wiggle it around a little bit, but it'll go through. We're going to put this rod back on first, then slide it on in. Next, put the spring back on. And we're ready to put our intake back on, but before we do, we want to make sure we got our gasket on correctly. Slide that on. It only goes on one way. Make sure the cutouts on the gasket match the cutouts in the carburetor. With that on, we can slide our intake on, and remember, we've got our breather tube that goes right here. Slide it on a little bit, get that tube set up on it. The tube's on there good, and it's backed in place. Next, we'll use our 8mm socket to put the screw back onto the intake. Next up is the 2 13mm screws that go on the 2 posts that hold the carburetor. Get those on, tighten them up. Now we can put our cover back on, have both levers pushed over, and this will go between the 2 levers. Next, we want to add the 10mm bolts that hold the carburetor cover on. Next up, we want to add our Torx 20 screws back in that hold the cover to the fan cover. Finally, We want to put the air filter back on, and then the air filter cover.